Are your values set so high that you could easily walk underneath them? That's not how it's supposed to be. Values are something wonderful and useful. Values make all the difference. In my podcast, I'll show you the best way to approach values.
Wordy Impulse, the podcast with Dr. Ulrich Vogel.
A warm welcome, dear listeners, to a new episode of our podcast. Here, it's all about values. And today I have a truly very, very interesting guest with me, namely the lovely Simona Deckers. Simona, greetings to you. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Uli, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, I was very happy to do it. I think when you Google you online, so to speak, and see what's out there, you find some really, really fascinating insights and such a top-level, diverse background, it's actually pretty rare to see. If we start with LinkedIn, you already have 20,000 followers by now, and if you look at all the places you've been and where you've studied as well. France is in there, of course, as well as Germany, all the places you've worked, and also the USA and Italy. You originally come from the world of fashion and art. Art history is part of it too, but then also business, and even the welfare sector. So, I have to say, your international and multifaceted background, cosmopolitan and polyglot, I just think that's fantastic. Of course, I will absolutely also put a direct link right down below in the show notes so that you, our dear listeners, can easily have a look for yourselves. But Simona, you have now been very successfully self-employed with the Shanti Company for 13 long years, and you are currently quite active in the dynamic and ever-evolving leadership field. And that's exactly where we want to dive in. You've been working intensively with leaders here for many years. What fascinates you about the topic of leadership? Right off the bat.
Yeah, leadership is the principle or the topic that has the greatest leverage to bring about change in society and the economy. And that's what is so incredibly appealing to me, to have an impact, to make the world a better place. And that happens through leadership because almost every problem we currently have in the world is, at its core, a leadership problem. If leadership were different, if leadership were lived and implemented differently, many of the problems we're struggling with today simply wouldn't exist. What fascinates me so much is, well, on the one hand, the influence that leadership has on tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, depending on where it is, on millions, and in some positions even on billions of people. So, this huge influence, but also the complexity that leadership faces or has to deal with. It's about strategy, about corporate culture, about change management, about personal development at the highest level. So, the whole thing is set at a very high level and is complex. And I love that. Yeah, I like it when things are complex.
Yeah, you don't like it when things are simple, to put it that way. It has to be a challenge.
Yeah, so, I like to live my life in a way that somehow, for me, it has to be simple. I mean, I don't personally like having a very complex life, but I do like complex questions. I like finding complex solutions. I enjoy diving into complex topics, even tackling them at a high level of complexity. So that's something I really enjoy. What also fascinates me, and what somehow has a synergy with myself, is CEOs, C-level. These are high performers with a growth mindset. These are ambitious people who are solution-oriented, who want to solve problems, who want to take on responsibility, otherwise they wouldn't be there. They seek growth, and those are very good conditions for working with people like that. So there's an openness there to seek growth and new perspectives, and to reflect, to question oneself. And that's obviously something for me. I'm the kind of person myself, that's my type, and I really enjoy working with people who are similar. Then there's also, as I just mentioned, this huge responsibility. And I'm also someone who really, really likes to take on responsibility. I can't get enough of it. And yes, that needs to be reflected on. And you need partners you can exchange ideas with. And a trusted person you can talk to openly about challenges. And I'm very happy to be that person. And then, of course, in leadership, we're always dealing with transformation. Leadership is extremely under pressure, if you will, under pressure to change very quickly. And leadership 5 years ago was something different. Leadership 50 years ago was something completely different. So we've seen a lot of cultural and structural changes in this area. Leadership needs to be redefined, and for me, that's also a fantastic challenge to work with people on. New leadership principles. To develop or to make your own, and to make a positive impact. And this very complex kind of work, often leads to very, very deep, long-term, and lasting good relationships. And I really appreciate that as well. So, these good relationships I have with my clients.
So, when you work with C-level people, the impact, as you just put it, is really significant. And especially stepping into this new territory, at a time that just isn't. Like how conservative, traditional leadership used to be. So, these are great things you're describing here about leadership. Especially the complexity, it's something that really needs to be mastered as well. Now, of course, you can work with leadership in all sorts of ways. In a variety of ways. Why did you choose to specialize in leadership coaching? What was the reason? Does it have to do with the relationships you just mentioned?
I think that's a great question you're asking, because for me, nothing else was ever an option. I never considered anything else, or played around with other business models for myself, or anything like that. So, this whole thing, coaching, consulting, training, supporting others, working through complex issues, that's just my thing. I honestly can't imagine doing anything else, especially because I've experienced for myself just how much it can change your life, or how much the quality of your life, your work, your relationships, your career, and personal life can change when you're open to personal growth. I'm a huge fan of personal growth, of development, of inner growth. Not in the sense of always faster, higher, further, but simply in terms of evolution, of developing yourself further. That's, for me, what we need in order to be successful. We can't be successful if we're stagnant, if we stay in our comfort zone. That's impossible.
But it's good that you mention it too. It's not about faster, higher, further anymore, but nowadays we need to go deeper, yes, and be more reflective. That's how we need to approach things. Still, we have to be ready, open, and quick. That's why it leads me to this. Could you sum up what good leadership looks like today in just a few sentences? Of course, you can't really define it, but what do you understand by good leadership these days?
Yes, so what is it? Today, you need visionary thinking and strategic foresight to lead a company successfully. That means you need long-term, ideally long-term, strategies, not just a 5-year plan. And then, as long as there are results, who cares what happens after me? Having an eye for market changes, understanding and identifying customer needs. Working them out well and knowing them, driving innovation within your own company, and being prepared for future challenges. So, having that foresight and combining it with strategy and vision. Of course, that means CEOs need strong communication skills to convince and motivate people. But it should also be clearly authentic and effective. So, I can't just say, okay, I want to convince and bring people along, and then be someone else or wear a mask. Or something like that. So, we also need those very authentic, approachable people who meet others at eye level. So, the next key point is emotional intelligence and empathy, as well as the desire to put people at the center.
Yes, that people really are at the center. And coherence is something, as you just described, that's authentic, approachable, but also consistent. And if you look at the last few years, Simona, you've already talked about leadership 10 years ago, 50 years ago, and so on. But if you look at the last few years, you've been working closely with C-level people. What are the requirements? What has really changed significantly? You just mentioned strategic foresight. What else have you noticed?
Yeah, what used to be different? So, in the past, leadership was basically management. Instead of truly people-centered leadership, management always asks, how do we get faster? How do we get more efficient? How do we become more cost-efficient? How do we become more profitable? And it's about processes, it's about ways of working, whereas leadership, it was always supposed to be that way, but I don't think we ever really had true leadership. Whereas today it's required, and due to demographic changes, it's also being demanded by employees and customers. Today we need real leadership that answers the question, why? Why are we doing this? What is the vision? And it's very clear that leadership and management, well, of course, we need both. We still need processes, obviously. Leadership now needs to be added. Leadership now has to be added to management. And we can't do without it anymore. And in the past, management was very much about strong, hierarchical control. It was top-down, authoritarian, control and command. So I'm really talking about 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago. Today, we already see rapid adaptation and agility. Quick decision-making processes are needed, and leaders today are enablers, not controllers. We've also seen a shift from technical expertise to social competence. That means, in the past, people were promoted or made it to top positions because they were technically good at what they did. And today, we should be looking at things like emotional intelligence. Are people empathetic? Are the people the ones being considered for leadership? So to speak, the ones who are supposed to move into leadership positions, do they also have communication skills? Can they build trust? Can they empower others instead of just micromanaging? From control to trust. We also need a shift from profit maximization to purpose and sustainability. And then, of course, since COVID, leaders need to be able not only to lead teams or companies in person, or work with their committees and department heads in person, but they also need to be able to lead in hybrid and virtual settings. They need to have those competencies as well.
Yeah, you just talked about some of those shifts. You could almost say it's a multi-shifting. It's
A multi-shifting, it's also huge when it comes to individual decisions. Control and command, it's my way or the highway. That's shifting from individual decisions to collaborative leadership, involving people, trusting them with responsibilities, and also seeking out their opinions. Collaboration that is participative.
And that actually brings me to the point that, I think, has become stronger in recent decades, but in the past really was neglected, meaning that leadership actually starts within oneself. And that's why I'd like to bring up the topic of self-reflection here. So, from your perspective, why is self-reflection so crucial for leaders?
Self-reflection, well, without self-reflection, nothing really works. Because leaders first have to get to know themselves, or at least know who they actually are as a leader. This is often neglected. Many people think, I need to know strategy, I need to become an enabler. But what they really should be practicing is self-reflection, taking time for themselves, for their own actions, for their decisions, because the impact, the influence, is just so huge. And when you start practicing self-reflection, you can make better decisions because you get different perspectives. And it also helps you to question yourself, to question your own behavior, and to handle pressure and challenges better. So instead of staying stuck in tunnel vision, you're able to step back and become an observer of yourself.
So, it's good that you obviously know about strategy and implementation and so on, but you have to. First and foremost, actually, I have to know myself or be able to handle myself. Yes, that's actually how you could put it. So, being able to practice introspection, to put things into perspective, and to really understand this as an integral, essential part of leadership. And I also notice, I think, from the way you speak, that it's quite natural for your clients that you can approach these topics with them. So somehow, it comes from you very organically, to put it that way.
Yes, it has to be that way. So if someone says, nah, I'm only interested in results, and everyone else has to do things the way I want, and now I just don't feel like asking questions or journaling anymore, or whatever else, then you're going to hit a wall. You can say that. You can tell me that now, and I'll tell you that's not the way to go.
And I also don't think you'll keep working with that person for long if they stick with that attitude. And I think you can also choose your clients. But it's actually true, I've been in the business for a long time now, that you keep running into people like that who basically say, no, I know exactly what I want, and I don't care, and so on. And that's just like banging your head against a wall. These days, that just doesn't work. Maybe that worked 50 years ago, but it just doesn't work like that anymore today.
No, not at all. That would also point to a certain personality type. The fixed type. We need this growth mindset. So for me, someone who has a fixed mindset, who says, that's just how the world is, and that's how I want things to go, is not suited for leadership.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So real leaders have to have a growth mindset. Being willing to get there because you can get there by seeking feedback, either on your own, or I always give my clients reflection questions, by asking yourself reflection questions, practicing mindfulness, getting feedback from your coaches and advisors. I just think that's so important, really important. If I can't question myself, if I can't somehow look at my own reflection, then real growth, truly deep, long-term, good growth for the company just isn't possible.
Yeah, I see it the same way. These days, it's just enriched in a completely different way in order to achieve success. I'd also like to steer things a bit more towards the practical side. What are some typical challenges you encounter in your work with people at the C-level? Is there something you'd say is really typical and that might also inspire our listeners a bit in that direction?
Yeah, of course. One thing that often characterizes CEOs is working under high pressure every day and carrying a lot of responsibility. And sometimes, of course, there's stress. There's a lot of stress, there's pressure, and depending on the situation, sometimes even more than that. How self-reflective they are, the risk, or how strong internal and external drivers are, the risk of burnout. It's always important to clarify strategic priorities so you don't, let's say, get stuck in the daily operational rush. There's actually not that much exchange at eye level because peer networks are often just pleasant but not really deep. Yeah, networks, so networking events get neglected because there's just so much work that this exchange with like-minded people often gets swept under the rug. And that's a shame. And so sometimes you get the feeling that there's not enough exchange, not enough new, fresh perspectives coming from peers either.
So there's a certain risk of loneliness because as a CEO, you don't really get told much within the company either. And then you're in a bit of a sandwich position with the supervisory board or owners, if that's the case. And that's why it's actually so important to really have this peer group.
Or just a partner to exchange ideas with, or simply someone to talk things over with, because otherwise the pressure, it can just get too much, and then also, how things are delegated. So some people are still doing too much operational work themselves. And right now, there's just a lot going on. Change management. That too can be a challenge, this change. At a deeper level. First to conceptualize it in an abstract way, but then also to implement it, making sure employees are brought along in the best way possible, that communication is optimal. That's often where things get stuck. Or that the change itself is really well understood and then can be communicated accordingly. Then, with a lot of CEOs, there's also this perfectionism or very high expectations of themselves.
Yes, which then gets projected, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes and no. So often it's also that they set a very high bar for themselves. And it can happen that others also end up with a high bar, but I often see that it's just for themselves. Yeah. And that's where overwhelm pretty much becomes inevitable.
It's basically programmed in, so to speak.
Programmed in, exactly. Losing yourself like that, it raises the question, if I do so much for others and work so much, where do I end up? We also have too many roles sometimes, losing focus. What is actually your real task? And what do you need to delegate? Yeah,
I see. I wanted to touch on the topic of pressure again, or actually, on two aspects. For example, I just mentioned the supervisory board or owners and so on. High targets are often set or expected there. And how can you manage that balancing act as a CEO to achieve these corporate goals on the one hand, but also master individual humanity on the other? With the people. So, how can you actually manage the balancing act at all? And as a follow-up question, since that's certainly very exhausting because of all the pressure, how do I, as a leader, actually stay high-performing and mentally strong in the long run? Basically, how do I maintain my own humanity as well? Yeah, absolutely. That's a
huge topic that we keep coming back to for sure.
absolutely.
First, the balancing act. Between company goals and individual humanity, being authentic really helps. So, going to work as myself, communicating with others as myself, and clearly stating the goals and expectations, really having completely open communication. Being able to bring the employees along with you. What's the vision? Why are we doing this? Why are we taking this path? Being totally transparent, being authentic. Then also, it also works when the why is strong, and the why becomes strong when the focus is on the long term and not just on short-term profits. That really resonates with people. And because humanity, I mean, yeah, when People see meaning in what they do. They feel more connected. They are more self-responsible, more motivated at work. And that's obviously ideal. That's something every entrepreneur, every CEO wants to have. Motivated people who go to work and actually enjoy what they do.
And it's also important here, as Robert S. Hartman says, companies exist for people, not people for companies. And that of course means again that people in a company also need to be able to experience humanity. And you described this why really nicely. You highlighted it again, the fundamental reason behind what we're doing. In a company, that's usually a core purpose that's bigger than anything you could achieve on your own. And if this core purpose, this why, this big idea, comes across authentically from the CEO and can be conveyed, then I believe we can truly bring ambition and humanity together.
Yeah, it is also very important that this delicate balancing act happens through sustainable and supportive organizational structures where people can do their work without burning out. Or that if the rate of illness is very high, that's a warning sign. To take a look at how our company culture is, what the mood is like. Are the goals realistic? Is the workload well distributed? So you can check at a lot of different points and review certain things. And that's also a starting point to achieve this balance. So it's clear we have to perform, we have to be successful. Of course, we need to make money, but not at the expense of employees' health.
Not at the expense of the core substance. After that, there's really nothing more to add, Simona. Thank you so much for sharing your insights into
the practical task. Uli, we still had the question. You also mentioned, how do leaders themselves stay strong?
Right, that we should include that, how they stay mentally strong. Thanks for reminding me.
So that was the second question. And that's about resilience, self-care, and mindfulness. And that's a super important topic, especially for CEOs who are under this pressure, who deal with complexity, who are facing such major change, where everything is shifting deeply, just like you said. It helps to build resilience, to think positively, and to create a strong social network. To learn from experience. To see what we experience as an opportunity, not as a crisis or something terrible that's happening. And time management is an issue. And also, to keep developing yourself and somehow maintaining work-life balance. Sometimes it's really small things, like making sure you have lunch or stay hydrated, or making sure you get enough sleep, or taking a 5-minute break between meetings.
Simple, everyday things. And I think there are a lot of people, or more and more people, who are realizing this. So not always pushing yourself to the limit here, so to speak. All the time, but I'm also responsible for my health and for recharging my energy. And of course, these kinds of measures help strengthen that as well. Thank you very much for the addition, Simona. It was really great to have you as a guest on Wordy Impulse today. And the way you explained all the complexity so nicely and clearly was fantastic. I think it was really valuable for all of us. Once again, thank you so much, and see you very soon. Take care, Simona.
Yes, thanks for the invitation, Uli.